On September 5, 1982, the Coulthurst family headed to Ruth Ann's restaurant for dinner in the small fishing town of Craig, Alaska. The fishing season was in its last days, but still, there were 150 fishing boats in town. Mark Coulthurst asked his young crew to tie his brand new fishing vessel to another boat since spaces were few. Then the family set out for dinner. Tonight it was a special occasion. Irene Coulthurst was pregnant and mom to 4-year-old John and Kimberly Coulthurst. John was excited and curious about his new baby brother or sister. 5-year-old Kimberly was content and eager to get the birthday celebration underway for her dad, Mark. Mark was well respected in the town. At only 28, he had the reputation of being a family man and a serious businessman. His goal was to retire by 50, which seemed possible due to the big salmon business he was doing. He had just purchased a $1 million fishing boat called the Investor and was expecting a $30,000 payment the next day for his last big catch. Mark asked for the check from the waitress Alice Irons, whom the family knew well from being regulars at Ruth Ann's. During the meal, Alice had been able to contain her slight annoyance as she served entrees due to what she would later call an interloper who blocked her way for about 10 to 15 minutes as the family dined. It might explain why the chart of the moment, 9:30 p.m., describes at least one of the victims as angry. The family packed up and headed towards the new boat. It was getting late and past the kids' bedtime, and a storm was brewing in the distance. Clouds were starting to form, but you could still see the full moon that illuminated the tiny fishing town. The full moon often represents a culmination of events and amplifies emotion. On this night, the moon was in Aries and represents anger. Witnesses on the neighboring vessel remember hearing the kids saying hi to passersby and taking caution to walk with care on the connecting boat before they reached their shiny new one. There were a total of 8 people on Mark's boat that night, which included 4 crew between the ages of 17 and 19, 8 being a Scorpio number. The boat's name, the Investor, would also reflect a Scorpio theme since the sign represents investors. It also represents revenge. No one knows who gained entry to the Investor that night when the family was attacked by an unknown assailant. Tonight, we'll look at the wedding chart or the timestamp of the wedding for the Coulthursts that might offer some clues, and the crime chart, which will help us profile the perpetrator. We'll look at the crime chart and the 12th house of hidden enemies, which is Saturn. Next to Pluto, it means the perp was jealous. Look at Venus in Leo, which also represents the perp. This will describe the way he looks. You're watching True Crime with Val Evans. We're talking about the Coulthurst murders. I don't know if any of you have heard about it. It's one of the cold cases that was never solved. And what I'd like to do tonight is look at the wedding chart and the crime chart and see what we can see when it comes to these murders. Their murders were horrific. You can see how the Investor there is burning, and that was taken from one of the fishermen, I believe, or one of the anglers who saw it. And this is up in Alaska. This was at the end of the season. And so Coulthurst, he decided that he was going to just take the family out to dinner. His wife was excited because they decided she was going to be his partner. And so it was a livable commercial boat that he had just purchased for like at least $1 million. The 12th house in this chart was of interest to me because there was a planet in it. When I see a planet in the 12th house, which is the house of the hidden enemies, I want to look at what rules that house. And it's Saturn. And so you can see Saturn right there at 20 degrees. So that gives somewhat of a profile of this person. And Saturn with Pluto shows a jealous person, and at 20 degrees, that's the Scorpio degree. You can see on forensicastrologer.com, there is a tab there that says degree key, and you can see all of the degrees. Well, here it's 20 degrees, so that's the Scorpio degree. Scorpio is a weird sign because I'll give you an example. I had a client who had the Lord of the fifth house of family in Scorpio, in the 11th house of Scorpio. And everyone in his family was jealous of each other. And the reason they were jealous was because each of them had something different, did not have what the other had, which is sort of the building block for that. So one had a lot of kids, which pregnancy, Scorpio, a bunch of kids. The other child didn't have any, but had a lot of independence, something that the mother didn't have. And I think she also, the sister adopted some as well. And then there was the youngest child. Everybody was jealous of her because she got the best treatment. So you can kind of get a sense of what Scorpio is all about from a basic sense, which is somebody else has something that you don't. Here we've got Saturn conjunct Pluto. Pluto is the Scorpio, it's the Lord of Scorpio, and basically you're looking at Scorpio when you see Pluto. You've got a sextile to Neptune and a sextile to Venus. So Venus actually also rules the perp here because it's the Lord of the seventh house. And Venus doesn't always show a female. It can be someone who maybe looks like a female, maybe has longer hair, might have effeminate features, and often shows someone with blonde or reddish hair. Also, sometimes they might have money or they might want money. There's something that has something to do with financial value. Neptune is fish, and Venus is pink fish, which is salmon. It was a crime chart where there was a carjacker who was arrested, and I happened to look at the crime chart, and the perpetrator had pink on. He had a pink t-shirt. So sometimes the color pink can come in. The man, who authorities said was a white man in his 20s, with a pockmarked face, returned to the boat after docking it, set the craft of the boat on fire, and then he vanished. The Coulthursts both had 2 children, and there were 4 deckhands between 17 and 19. It is considered Alaska's most vicious unsolved homicide. Leland Hale actually is an author that has done a lot of writing on this. He has a book, and there's also blogs. And he said that even though there was, it was a small fishing town in Alaska with about 100 fishing boats at the time, the population was about 600. Coulthurst had that boat. It was brand new, and he was recognized in the town as somebody who was very talented in fishing. He wasn't actually from Craig. His family wasn't. He was from Blaine, Washington. All of the deckhands were from Blaine, too. So he wasn't a regular in Craig and not very well acquainted with locals in the town. But regardless, Craig, Alaska, has gained notoriety since 1982 for being the site of this crime, unfortunately. He had kind of like an overnight success, according to a true crime podcast called Unresolved. The podcast insinuates that Coulthurst's quick success got to his head. So he may have been a little bit arrogant, and he would frequently get into fights. So if you see the crime chart in this case, the moon is in Aries, so somebody who's very angry. And when the moon is in the 12th house of secrets and it's kind of hidden, it can show when somebody is trying to not be angry or hide his anger. Ruth Ann's restaurant, which I indicated in the intro, it was one of the only restaurants in town. And so witnesses said the family stayed at the restaurant till about 9:30. And that's the time that we would use for the crime chart, 9:30. They returned to their ship just after paying the bill, and they would be seen alive, last seen alive before 10 p.m. So once bystanders saw the fire on the boat, they put it out, but they were not able to save anyone inside. No one could have survived the fire anyway. Uh, it is said that bystanders took 4 hours to put out the fires. They found four bodies and charred beyond recognition. So, investigators found Coulthurst and his wife had been shot several times. There were bullet holes in the bodies, and the remains of the three crew members were found, but only of teeth, bones, and torso of those crew members. So, they tried to identify the remains with dental records and were not successful with all of them. Let me just skip over to the suspect. The primary suspect was a man named John Peel, who worked for the Coulthursts before and had a fallout with the family. Peel was a 24-year-old from Bellingham, Washington, who was charged nearly 2 years after the murders. He had been charged by authorities from Ketchikan, Alaska, for all 8 murders as the primary suspect. They hoped to transport Peel from Washington to Alaska because even though Peel lived in Washington, the crimes took place in Alaska. Peel was a man who worked for Coulthurst on the Investor in the 1980 and 81 fishing seasons. But Peel and Coulthurst had a falling out, and Peel found work for another boat. In 1982, Peel was working for another boat in Craig while the murders happened. One witness saw Peel and Coulthurst interacting with each other at the restaurant before the whole crew was murdered. He was there. He was in that town on the night of the murders. But another witness said he wasn't the man on the skiff of the boat. Authorities charged him for the murders because they believed he had a strong personal animus against the Coulthurst family for firing him. However, the evidence was circumstantial. Some phoned an anonymous tip line to investigate Peel. The reason suspicion escalated for investigators was because Peel failed a polygraph. There was still no physical evidence. The grand jury would file a criminal indictment against Peel and charge him with all 8 murders and first-degree arson. Peel was facing life in prison for the 8 murders, as well as 20 years in prison for the arson charge. So they tried to argue Peel committed the crime. After all, he was in Craig and he did speak with the Coulthursts right before they died. However, Peel seemed to be a very unusual suspect. He had no prior criminal record and was deemed by all accounts to have very good character. He had just gotten married and had his first child a year before getting arrested, and even members of the Coulthurst family described him to be a real pleasant guy. One friend said of Peel, the suspect, "Why, he didn't even have the nerve to punch anyone. I'd believe the investor killer was my mother before I'd believe it was him." As for the grand jury indictment, a police transcription of a Peel interview suggested he had confessed. Then there was a second trial, and that was the state of Alaska's longest-running prosecution and its most expensive one. It spent $2 million on the initial investigation and then $700,000 on the retrial. Peel was acquitted again after 3 months of testimony and 4 days of deliberation, and he filed a civil suit against the state of Alaska. So anyway, that's some of the background. And what do intercepted signs and planets mean in forensic astrology? In regular astrology, the energy of the signs and planets that are intercepted are hard to access, be seen. They're hidden. Well, I use it's a great question. And I just look at it as far as boundaries. When you're looking for someone, it's on the edge of, say, in this case, if the person went missing and there was something at the end at like 29 degrees Virgo, it would be at the end of a boundary of land. So I look at it from a location standpoint. That's one way. And it's also when someone starts something and then goes on to the next thing. So in this case, it might have something to do with, well, it's the 6th house, and there's a lot of people in the 6th house. So it's going to show different profiles of people that are in the 6th house. There's a lot of discussion of people who are working, the 6th house of work. So, and Virgo is also to work. Sun in Virgo is the boss, or the person who is overseeing the work. So then you can see the other descriptions of the workers, and they might have more of a Libra profile. So Libra might be how they look, um, might look very attractive. And but the biggest thing, though, I think, is Saturn here. Saturn is like a stalker. It's like he is stalking them on this night. And Saturn, representing one of the rulers of the perp, in Libra shows somebody who might be considered good looking, Libra attractive. So that's a possibility. So you also have Pluto on the angle, and when it is on an angle, which is the dark uh, line in every chart, that's like one of the biggest clues. It shows that there's going to be some Pluto scorpionic energy. So it's pretty obvious that this is revenge. The other thing too is Mercury shows young people, and Saturn being in the sixth, he's around those young people. It also shows kids. So a lot of people are around this killer. Neptune in the ninth house, that is a foreign place to fish. Neptune in the ninth, and also when you have those uh, planets in the seventh house, you have Jupiter in Scorpio. That's a lot of jealousy. So that can give some, and that's also how the intercepted signs can work. The chart wants you to look at Venus for the killer because it's the Lord of the seventh. But we're going to give you a couple of other clues, and it's going to be in Scorpio. So Jupiter in Scorpio, jealousy. Mars is a weapon. And in Scorpio, that can show somebody else's weapon that he might have used. So that's a little bit of how this crime chart is looking here. It's also interesting. Now you can look at a crime chart just like you would look at anybody's birth chart or any chart. It's a horary chart. So, and the south node you can see is right at the top of the MC. It is conjunct Black Moon Lilith. Black Moon Lilith is often a Plutonian energy. It's someone who's sinister and also someone that comes from another town. Now, with South Node is, and you can see this in your solar chart if you want, or in your birth chart, it shows what you leave behind. In the crime chart, it's going to show what is left behind. Now, the suspect left behind his career after this, was in the 10th house. So that's one way that the South Node may have manifested in this. And it's also what is left behind, too. So it looks like South Node is in Capricorn. And Capricorn can be a number of things. It can mean soot. And you're seeing the picture of the investor being burned. Also, sun is often shown when there's somebody or something that's burned. And so you can see sun there, but it's not really, I don't really see a big clue about the fact that the boat was burned. Yeah, it looks like there was success, part of fortune there. Now, part of fortune is what you see in your solar chart or your birth chart when you want to see what success happened. And so you could say that the sun, which is the fire, that there was a success with the fire. Okay, so what I want to do is go back to the wedding chart, which I said I was going to look at. And this is, put it all there, yeah. Okay, so this is the wedding chart. Let me just take some, yeah, I know. Exactly. And to me, it shows workers. And, the sun is also the co-ruler of the perpetrator. So that killer is right in there with the workers, and I think could have been a worker himself, which Peel was suspected of. Thank you, Christina, for saying that. Uh, it's just from doing charts a lot. And of course, this is for, by the way, entertainment purposes. There were a lot of people that suspected Peel, but he's been exonerated. So in these crime charts, you start to really see how people are symbols. And Venus in the crime chart is in Leo. And Leo represents blondes, things that are yellow. And if you know Trump and his Leo qualities, he's orange hair. So that might give you some kind of indicator that maybe Peel was in the area. Not saying that he did anything, but what is Leo? It's represented by Venus, which is the perpetrator. So Peel, I don't know. I couldn't help but think that. This is the wedding chart, and I'm not sure if that's the time, but it sure looks like a good chart to me. You can still read it though without the houses, and you can also see there's a lot of Sagittarius. What's Sagittarius? That's a horse. Coulthurst is, it's the Coulthurst marriage. There's a square with Jupiter in Pisces, and that is an angler or fisherman. So the Coulthursts were at war or had and this would come out in their wedding chart. This would predict what would happen with them. So there would be a big war with an angler. And also it shows that there might have been a big fraud too, because Neptune is right there with the North Node, also meaning lies and deceit. Sagittarius also represents big voyages and boats. So there's a possibility that there may have been some kind of, I don't know, creative paperwork on a boat. So, and you can see that Pluto is there, and it just enhances that. So it's like a big fraud, or somebody may be calling a boat a big fraud. With the investor, it's so interesting where this boat was named the investor, which would be Scorpio. And Mars in Scorpio would show possible weapons there. In the third house, and you look for stelliums in that, Saturn is in retrograde. Saturn means death, and it's in Cancer, so family death. Now, not to say that everybody's, who has Saturn in Cancer has a family death that is as notorious as this. But because it is sextiling Moon, that shows that the public would see it, that it would be a famous death. Neptune in Sagittarius shows ocean voyages. One thing that you look at when you look at crime charts, or in this case, a wedding chart, you look at stelliums, which is 3 planets or more. With Uranus here, and if this is right, which it looks right to me, in their 5th house would be like a family shock, revenge on the family. Look at Chiron at the top there in Aries, which would show that everybody in the world would see and hear about how they were hurt. So that seems like it's very prominent in this chart. But I think the biggest thing here is Jupiter in Pisces. That's someone who fishes and does it in a career kind of way. MC shows your career. People who are getting married shouldn't look at this and say, oh my God, is my wedding chart okay? Because this is very rare to have something like this happen. And crime charts, I always say, are just a little bit different because you already know that there's a crime that happened. And in a regular wedding chart, you're going to see challenges. You're definitely going to see challenges. You're going to see how you're going to get along. One thing that is really important is to get married when Jupiter is direct, not retrograde. So that helps the marriage a lot. And it seems like they had a good marriage. He was not flawed in any way. Jupiter retrograde shows that the groom can be flawed in some way. So it showed like he He kind of had his act together. There was talk of drugs being involved with this crime, and, you know, there are rumors, but when I see Rahu or North Node there with Neptune, it can show like rumors or lies about drugs. So I think that's a possibility too. It's just so much Sagittarius. It's crazy. Okay, so now I'm going to go to, and this is Peel. This is one of the suspects, and he has blondish red hair. He has blue eyes. Neptune is blue, and he's an angler, so he certainly fits the profile of this crime. So, all right. So, if you guys have any questions, let me know. I'm just coming on quick tonight, and then I'll look at it more tomorrow. And then we're also going to focus on a couple of other crimes that you might be interested in. But in this case, you could really see that there was anger with the victims. The victim, was in Aries, and it was at the very end of Aries. So it showed that that there was something that was about to change from the anger, and then it would go into Taurus. So it's possible that he was angry, and then he went and had his dessert or something, and he went on and ate, and then he left. So a lot of times in these types of charts, you're going to see um, the degree 18. You might see algol. You'll see some very interesting types of PNAs, personal name asteroids, fixed stars, which I'll go over tomorrow. But you can go to my site, Forensic Astrologer, and there's a tab on there on fixed stars, and you can check that out. So we've got the ascendant at 9:30 at 26 degrees. That's the Taurus degree. This is anger about money. Okay. Now, in the first house, you can see what someone looks like. And it could be the victim, it could be someone else in the story. Remember, they were saying that he had a pockmarked face. But look at how Chiron is right on Algol. And Algol, and you may have seen my last video on Paulina, how she was married to Cars frontman Rick Ocasek. And in her chart, he represented Algol. Now, it's interesting how that works out, because sometimes you see someone in a chart that is very flawed to you, but he or she might not be flawed to other people. It's that they come up short to the person, the chart holder. Here's another clue here. And I think this actually happened too with Peel. I believe he fired him, or they had some kind of falling out. And look at how Venus, which represents Peel, squares Uranus, and that's like a divorce. We saw that too in the Idaho murders. He had Uranus there, and later it came out that he was almost fired around the time of the murder, but he wasn't fired until later on. But we saw that pretty early on, that there was some kind of a break or firing or breakup that he was going through. Well, it's the same thing here. Now, Saturn with Pluto. Saturn means bones. And so with Pluto, it can mean a lot of bones. Could mean that there's some kind of connection with like a cemetery with the suspect. So, but the South Node up at the very top of the 10th house really shows that someone left their career behind. So it all has to do with someone's career and with revenge. And you can also see with Venus, there's a couple there, 7 degrees. So that's, of course, Mark and Irene. Is Pluto, or Scott, hi Scott, transforming that boat? And because it has so much to do with fishing, I mean, Neptune is going to mean fish here, and Pluto means lots and lots. So that's lots and lots of fish. Look at that blue triangle there with Venus, lots and lots of valuable fish. Okay, so that's like That's the good thing of this chart, probably the only good thing of this chart is that there's so much valuable fish and the amount of money from the fish. It's basically fish money you're looking at. You can also go to the North Node down on, which is also very, very strong. It's on the fourth house cusp. And that's interesting because the North Node represents the alibi. The alibi would be maybe that he was home because it's the fourth house of home. But it also means the lie. That's what the lie is. Now, North Node in Cancer, whenever you see Rahu or North Node in maybe your dasha chart, you can check that out. And I do that in my readings. I'll show you your dasha chart. But the times when you see Rahu, it can show that it's harder to make money. It's kind of like poverty. And also, it also means foreign. So North Node in the fourth house could show a foreign home. And or maybe this person, the suspect, was in a home that was very sparse, low level type of thing. And when you're in your Rahu phase, and it could be a dasha or a subdasha, it often shows that you feel like a foreigner. Like in my case, I had the Rahu dasha when I was a kid, and up until probably my first year in college. And I always felt foreign because I wasn't foreign, but my family would travel a lot because of my dad's work. And I was always in these schools and I just felt like out of place and I felt like a foreigner. So that's how you can feel when you're in a North Node phase in your life. You can look it up too if you're interested. You can go to Cosmic Squares and go to the Dasha calculator and just plug in your information. I think that in this case, Venus in Leo is so revealing in this chart. You have somebody who's got light blonde hair or did during the crimes. Now, he shot the kids, shot the couple, and then the deckhands. And then what he did was that night, he brought the commercial vessel out into the water, and then he took the dinghy back. And somebody saw him and said, "Hey, what's up?" And he's like, "Hey," and he played it completely cool. And then he left. But then he came back the next day and then set fire to the boat. And I believe it was during the day. So this is a perp who was deceiving everyone, deceiving the anglers around him in the boats who witnessed him. It's amazing how none of them could really remember what he looked like. You could probably get from this chart that he returned